May 14, 1942. The air in the basement did not move. It hung suspended, a heavy gray curtain woven from the exhaust of IBM punch card machines, the acrid ozone of overheating vacuum tubes, and the relentless, suffocating blue smoke of 3 dozen chain-smoking men. To reach this place you had to descend. You had to leave the warm, tropical night of Hawaii, with its scent of hibiscus and sea salt, and walk down a concrete stairwell that felt less like a military facility and more like the throat of a tomb. At the bottom, behind heavy steel doors, lay Station Hypo. It was a windowless concrete box. The walls were painted a color that might have once been beige, but had long since yellowed into the hue of an old bruise. There was no day here. There was no night. There was only the watch. Commander Joseph Rochefort sat at his desk in the center of this purgatory. He was not wearing the crisp white uniform of a United States naval officer. He was not wearing the gold-braided hat that commanded respect. Instead, he was wrapped in a garment that would have looked ridiculous anywhere else on Earth but here, in this freezing dungeon. It was a red velvet smoking jacket, a bathrobe. The basement was kept at a meat locker temperature to prevent the primitive IBM computers from melting down, and Rochefort, whose body carried zero excess fat, was perpetually shivering. On his feet he wore a pair of battered carpet slippers that looked like they had been chewed by a dog. He leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking under the shift in weight. He removed his wire-rimmed glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. The red marks there were permanent now, dug into the skin like scars. His eyes, when he opened them, were bloodshot maps of exhaustion. He hadn't slept a full night in 5 months, not since December 7th. That date was a ghost that haunted every corner of this room. 6 months ago, the Japanese had smashed Pearl Harbor while Rochefort and his team were sitting in this very room, listening to the radio traffic, blind to the knife coming at their throats. The shame of that failure was a physical weight in Rochefort's gut. It was an ulcer that burned every time he drank the sludge they called coffee. He reached for a pack of cigarettes. His fingers were stained a deep nicotine yellow. He struck a match, the sulfur flare hissing in the quiet, and inhaled deeply. The smoke burned his lungs, a familiar, toxic comfort. "Skipper?" The voice came from Lieutenant Commander Jasper Holmes, standing by the punch card sorter. Holmes looked like a man who had walked through a hurricane. His uniform was wrinkled, his tie loosened, his face gray with fatigue. Rochefort didn't turn immediately. He exhaled a long plume of smoke toward the low ceiling. "Tell me you have something, Jasper. Tell me the additive tables are making sense." Holmes walked over, holding a sheaf of paper that was still warm from the printer. "It's the traffic volume, Joe. It's spiking again. The main carrier strike force, they've gone silent. Totally radio silent. But the logistics chatter? It's screaming." Rochefort took the papers. His hands were steady, despite the caffeine and the lack of sleep. He scanned the columns of numbers. To an untrained eye, it was gibberish. To Rochefort, it was music. It was a symphony of logistics. "Ships need oil," Rochefort murmured, his voice raspy. "Ships need rice. They need miso. They need ammunition." He stopped at a specific code group. "Look at this. Why is a transport fleet requesting winter gear, and then canceling it to request tropical oil blends?" Holmes leaned in, smelling of stale sweat and fear. "Winter gear suggests the North. Aleutians. Alaska." "Exactly," Rochefort said, his eyes narrowing behind the smoke. "That's what they want us to think. They order parkas, they chatter about snow. It's a performance, Jasper. It's kabuki theater." Rochefort closed his eyes and drifted away from the basement. In his mind, he wasn't in Hawaii. He was back in Tokyo, where he had lived for 3 years as a language student. He remembered the smell of the fish markets in Tsukiji. He remembered the rigid, terrifying politeness of the Japanese naval officers he had met. He remembered their obsession with Bushido. "They are arrogant," Rochefort thought. "It is their greatest strength and their fatal flaw. They don't just want to win, they want to demonstrate superiority. They want a complex, beautiful, intricate plan. Attacking the Aleutian Islands, a frozen wasteland in the North Pacific, was too simple. It was too ugly. It didn't have honor. Admiral Yamamoto, the architect of the attack on Pearl Harbor, wouldn't waste his masterpiece on a pile of ice. "It's not the North," Rochefort whispered, opening his eyes. "The winter gear is a feint. The radio silence is the real clue. When a tiger goes quiet, it's not sleeping. It's crouching." "Washington disagrees," Holmes said quietly. The words sucked the oxygen out of the room. 4,000 miles away, in Washington, D.C., the war looked very different. Here there were no bathrobes. There were no carpet slippers. The floors were polished marble that clicked sharply under the heels of dress shoes. Captain John Redmond stood by the window of his pristine office. He was a man of regulations. He believed in the chain of command as if it were a religion. To Redmond, Joseph Rochefort was not a genius. He was a tumor. A cowboy running a rogue operation in a basement, bypassing protocols, sending reports that weren't properly formatted, and daring to question the wisdom of his superiors. Redmond looked at his brother, Commander Joseph Redmond. "He's insubordinate, Joe. It's not just that his analysis is wrong, it's his tone." He turned to the map. "The data is clear. The Japanese intercepts mention North repeatedly. We have to assume the target is the Aleutians." "But Rochefort insists the target is AF," his brother replied. Redmond scoffed. "Rochefort is exhausted. He's been in that hole too long. He's seeing ghosts. AF could be anything. It could be a supply depot. To assume it's a major strategic target based on intuition? That's not how we fight wars." Redmond sat down and typed a memorandum. It was a beautiful piece of bureaucratic violence. In polite, formal military language, he effectively argued that the intelligence team in Pearl Harbor had lost its mind. Back in the dungeon, the teleprinter began to chatter. Rochefort ripped the message from the machine. "From Washington. Disregard hypo estimates. Intelligence indicates Northern Pacific operation. Maintain defensive posture. Alaska sector." Rochefort laughed. It was a dry, broken sound. He crumpled the message into a ball and threw it at the wall. "They aren't just wrong," Rochefort whispered to the empty air. "They are actively trying to lose this war." He looked around his kingdom of shadows. His men were slumped over their desks, asleep on folded arms. These men were giving their lives, destroying their health, all to find the truth in a haystack of numbers. And Washington was treating them like naughty children. "I need to see Nimitz," Rochefort said. He walked out of the basement, blinking in the harsh tropical sunlight. He marched past the startled aides and walked straight into the office of Admiral Chester Nimitz. The admiral stood there, the calm in the center of the storm. He looked at Rochefort. He saw the trembling hands. He saw the desperation. "Come in, Joe," Nimitz said softly. Rochefort stepped forward, placing his hands on the admiral's desk. "Admiral, look at the timeline. The Japanese mindset is about the decisive battle. They don't want Alaska. Alaska is fog and bears. They want you. They want the Enterprise. They want the Hornet." "Why Midway?" Nimitz asked. "Because Midway is a sentry," Rochefort said. "It's the door to Hawaii. If they take Midway, they can fly long-range bombers to Honolulu. They know you can't ignore it, so they attack Midway to force you to bring the carriers out to fight. It's a trap, Admiral. It's a kill box." Nimitz leaned back. "Washington has logic, Joe. They have data. What do you have?" "I have the ghost," Rochefort whispered. "I have the additive table. I have 45,000 code groups that tell a story." "Washington is reading the words, Admiral. I am reading the music." Nimitz sighed. "I can't gamble the fleet on music. I need proof. I need something harder than intuition." The silence in the room stretched, and then the idea struck Rochefort. It wasn't a military strategy, it was a trick. "Proof," Rochefort said. "You want proof that AF is Midway?" I can make them tell us. I can make the Japanese Imperial Navy send a message directly to Washington confirming that I am right and the Red Man brothers are idiots. How? Nimitz asked. The water, Rochefort said. Midway has a desalination plant. It processes seawater into drinking water. It's vital. If it breaks, the garrison dies. So let's break it. Let's order the commander of Midway to send a fake radio message, uncoded, in plain English, complaining that the water plant has exploded. Let them whine about the thirst. Let them beg for water barges. Nimitz stared at him. He began to see the shape of the trap. The Japanese listening posts on Wake Island monitor everything coming out of Midway, Rochefort continued. If they hear Midway is out of water, they will report it to Tokyo. And if they report it, they will have to use the code for Midway. AF, Nimitz whispered. Exactly, Rochefort said. If we intercept a Japanese message 2 days from now saying AF is short on water, then we know. AF is Midway. No more guessing. Nimitz looked at the disheveled commander. He saw the madness, yes, but he also saw the brilliance. Do it, Nimitz ordered. But Joe? If you're wrong, I can't save you. Washington will have your head on a pike. Rochefort straightened up. Admiral, if I'm wrong, I won't need you to save me, because the Japanese will be walking down this hallway to shoot us both. May 20th, 1942, Midway Atoll. The garrison commander held the order. It didn't make sense, but he followed it. The operator flipped the switch to the open frequency. Water distillation unit failure. Repair impossible. Reserves critically low. Request emergency supply. The signal left the antenna, traveling at the speed of light, a fragile electronic lie sent out into the dark. In the dungeon, the waiting began. Rochefort sat at his desk, staring at the wall clock. The waiting was a physical torture. In the basement, time didn't flow. It dripped. What if they don't buy it, Joe? Holmes asked. What if they know we're listening? They'll report it, Rochefort said, his voice low. They are efficient. Efficiency is their religion. May 24, 1942. The night shift was on duty. Suddenly, a radio man named Hamlin sat up straight. He began to type furiously. Skipper! Hamlin shouted. We got a live one. High priority traffic from Wake to Tokyo. Rochefort was at the table in 2 seconds. Strip it. Now. Get the additive tables. The team descended on the message. The pencil moved across the paper. Group 1, report. Group 2, enemy. Group 3, unit. The cryptanalyst found the match. He wrote down 2 letters. AF. Rochefort felt his heart stop. It was there. The pencil continued. Equipment, failure, water, supply, shortage. The room went dead silent. The message lay there, naked and undeniable. AF reports water distillation equipment, failure. Rochefort stared at the paper. It was the smoking gun. It was the confession. A sound started in Rochefort's throat. We got them, he whispered. Then he yelled it. We got them! He grabbed the paper. He didn't care that he was wearing slippers. He drove straight to Nimitz's office. He slammed the paper down on the Admiral's desk. It's not the North, Admiral. It's not a guess. It's the water. They told us. AF is short on water. AF is Midway. Nimitz picked up the intercept. The Admiral let out a long, slow breath. The tension that had held his shoulders rigid for weeks seemed to dissolve. Washington was wrong. The Redman brothers were wrong. The man in the bathrobe was right. You were right, Joe, Nimitz said quietly. They are coming, Admiral, Rochefort said. We know where, and we know when. First week of June, and we know who. 4 carriers, the Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu. Nimitz turned to the map. He moved the markers for the Enterprise and the Hornet. He moved them away from the Aleutians. He moved them to a spot in the open ocean, northeast of Midway. Go back to the basement, Joe, Nimitz said. You've just saved the Pacific. June 4th, 1942. The silence in the basement was not peaceful. It was a predator waiting to strike. Commander Rochefort sat at the center of his web. He was shivering. Now there was nothing left to do but listen. The room was filled with the static hiss of the receivers. Then a voice cut through. It was a scream in plain English. "Zeros! They're all over us! My God, there are so many!" Rochefort froze. "Turn it up," he ordered. "Turn it up!" The basement was filled with the sounds of a massacre. For the next 40 minutes, the men in the basement listened to the systematic destruction of the American torpedo squadrons. They could only hear the panic. "Tail gunner is dead! Breaking off! Oh, Jesus, they're all going in!" And then silence. One by one, the voices died out. Torpedo Squadron 8 wiped out. Torpedo Squadron 6 decimated. Rochefort put his head in his hands. "I sent them there," he thought. "I insisted. And for what? To watch them die?" "It's over, Joe," Holmes said softly. "We didn't scratch them." "No," Rochefort whispered. "It's not over. Physics, Jasper. Remember the physics. The Zeros have been fighting at sea level for an hour. They're burning fuel. They're out of ammo. Where are the Zeros? They are on the water. And where are our dive bombers? They are high. They are high and they are late." High above the Pacific, Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey was indeed high, and he was indeed late. He was flying on fumes. But then he saw them. The Kido Butai. 4 carriers sailing in a diamond formation. And Rochefort was right. The sky above them was empty. The Japanese lookouts were all looking down at the water, cheering their victory against the torpedo planes. Nobody looked up. McCluskey pushed the stick forward. The nose of the Dauntless dropped. The plane fell out of the sky like a stone. The target in his sights was the Kaga. The flight deck was full. It was packed with planes fueling and arming. The carrier wasn't just a ship. It was a floating bomb waiting for a spark. The first bomb missed. The second bomb missed. The third bomb did not. It smashed through the flight deck. The explosion was not just a fire, it was a geologic event. The Kaga simply opened up. 3 miles away, the Akagi was hit. 1 bomb. Just one. But it landed on the midship elevator. The pride of the fleet was gutted in seconds. Then the Soryu. 3 hits, 3 infernos. In 5 minutes, the balance of power in the Pacific Ocean shifted forever. In the dungeon, the Japanese frequencies had gone from disciplined silence to absolute chaos. Fire spreading out of control. Abandoned ship. Rochefort stood in the center of the room. He was waiting for one voice. And then it came. Flash message. Target neutralized. I repeat. 3 carriers burning. Kaga is burning. Akagi is burning. Soryu is burning. They are hellfires. The sound that erupted in Station Hypo wasn't a cheer. It was a roar. Men threw their headphones. They hugged each other. But Joseph Rochefort didn't cheer. He felt his legs give out. He sat down heavily. He picked up the yellow teletype paper from Washington, ordering him to ignore Midway. He took his lighter and set the corner of the paper on fire. He watched it burn. Jasper Holmes walked over, tears streaming down his face. "Joe? My God, Joe. You did it. You were right." Rochefort dropped the burning paper into his ashtray. "I didn't do it, Jasper," he whispered. "The pilots did it. I just told them where to look. I just turned on the lights." June 7th, 1942. The battle was over. The Japanese fleet was broken. In the basement, the men walked like zombies. Rochefort sat at his desk. The phone didn't ring. The teletype didn't chatter with congratulations. Instead, a single courier arrived. It wasn't a thank you. It was a memo from Washington complaining about the formatting of his previous intelligence summaries. Rochefort stared at the words. He started to laugh. "They're writing us up for paperwork errors," he whispered. "We just sank the Kido Butai, and Washington is mad that I didn't use the right margin width. Captain John Redman and his brother in Washington were busy. They were not fighting the Japanese, they were fighting history. They knew that if the truth came out, their careers would be over. So they decided to rewrite the narrative. They drafted memos claiming the victory was a collaborative effort coordinated by Washington. They described Rochefort as uncooperative and undisciplined. They were stripping the medals off Rochefort's chest before he even received them. October 1942. The end didn't come with a bang, it came with a transfer order. Rochefort held the paper. Subject: change of duty. Commander Joseph Rochefort is hereby relieved of command. New assignment: officer in charge, floating dry dock, San Francisco. He read it 3 times. A dry dock. They were sending the man who broke the Japanese code to manage a floating garage for broken ships. It was an insult so precise, so calculated, that it took his breath away. It wasn't just a demotion, it was an erasure. Jasper Holmes stood in the doorway. "Joe, you can't go. We need you." Rochefort stood up. He took off his red smoking jacket, folding it carefully. He placed it on the back of his chair. It looked like a shed skin. "Nimitz has the fleet, Jasper," Rochefort said softly. "The Japanese are running. The code is broken. You don't need me anymore. I was the lockpicker. The door is open now. It's not right," Holmes said. "They are punishing you for being right. The price of being right, Jasper," Rochefort said, "is that you make everyone else look wrong, and powerful men do not forgive that." He picked up his sea bag. He didn't look back. He walked out of the basement, up the concrete stairs, and into the blinding Hawaiian sun. He walked alone. No band played, no sailors saluted. The man who saved America simply got into a jeep and drove away. San Francisco was cold and gray. At the floating dry dock, Commander Rochefort checked repair schedules. He never bragged, he never wrote a memoir. He watched from afar as the Redman brothers were promoted. They became admirals. But at night in his small apartment, he would sometimes sit in a chair by the window, smoking a cigarette, looking out at the Pacific Ocean. He would close his eyes and hear the static. He would hear the dit-da-dit of the Morse code. He knew the truth. And for a man like Rochefort, perhaps that had to be enough. Joseph Rochefort died in 1976. His funeral was modest. There were no gun salutes. The president didn't attend. He was buried with his secrets. It took 40 years for the truth to catch up. In 1986, the documents were declassified. The truth exploded like a depth charge. The public realized that the hero of Midway wasn't an admiral on a bridge. It was the weird guy in the basement. May 31, 1986. The White House. President Ronald Reagan stood at the podium. He handed the Distinguished Service Medal to Rochefort's daughter. It was a moment of absolute vindication. But as the applause filled the room, one couldn't help but wonder. Was Rochefort watching? And if he was he smiling? Or was he sitting in a celestial basement wearing a red smoking jacket, looking at the medal with a skeptical eye, dragging on a cigarette and whispering, "About damn time"? Because the true tragedy of Joseph Rochefort wasn't that he wasn't honored, it was that he didn't need the honor. He did it because the code was there. He did it because, in the silence of the dungeon, he heard the truth when the rest of the world was deaf. He was the ghost in the machine. And ghosts don't need medals. They just need to be right.